We're just waiting for the waiting room to filter in, and we'll get on our way. Welcome today to today's ITGA Collaborative Community Conversations webinar series. Today's webinar is entitled Addressing Students' Basic Needs Through Strategic Campus and Community Partnerships. And we're so happy to have a group of expert panelists here to lead us through today's conversation. My name is Melissa Selesky. I am the co-chair of the ITGA Professional Development Committee, and I'm just here to give you a few housekeeping notes before I turn it over. First off, this session is being recorded and will be distributed to you after the session. A few housekeeping notes. Please submit your questions in the Q&A at any time. We'll leave time for questions at the end, but feel free to enter them whenever you're ready. We'd like to kick off the Q&A with hearing who's in the room. So if you want to share where you're coming from, or what institution or what part of the world you're checking in with, please feel free to drop it in the Q&A at any time. So let's get started. As the cost of tuition, housing, and living expenses continue to rise, more college students are struggling to meet their basic needs, especially with food. The issues are becoming more and more prevalent across our campuses with every day. So let's hear some more about the best practices and some cutting-edge solutions. Leading today's conversation is my Rutgers colleague, Dr. Philip Smith, who is Assistant Dean for Student Basic Needs at Rutgers University, New Brunswick in New Jersey. Phil, the webinar is yours. I'm going to hand it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you very much. I'm excited to be here. Again, my name is Philip Smith. I'm Assistant Dean of Students here at Rutgers University, overseeing our basic needs area. And I'm excited to be able to come to IGA to talk about basic needs and the different support systems that go along with it. So I'm just going to go ahead and start sharing my screen first to get some housekeeping pieces of what we are doing on our campuses, and just to be able to share with you all how we are supporting students on our different campuses. So with our panel today, again, my name is Philip Smith, but we also have Hannah Wilkes, who is interim Assistant Dean of Students for University of Colorado Boulder. We have Yemi Bajobi, Chief Executive for Arts Students Union in London, United Kingdom, and Alan Roberts, Board Trustee for Aberystwyth, I think that's how you pronounce it. I apologize, Alan, but Student Union in Wales, UK. Wanted to also kind of give everyone a little bit of a background on our different campuses and where we are from, just different enrollment numbers, what some of the costs are initially for our different campuses. So you can kind of see where we kind of stand in there. So just going to give this a few more seconds for folks to kind of see some of those differences and some of our rankings, some of our student sizes. And again, we're going to go dive into a little bit about all the different programs that we have available on our different campuses and how, again, we are supporting those students. And before we get started, we also want to make sure that we are defining what basic needs. So we're all on the same page as far as what we're talking about, and you as the audience are also aware of what basic needs are and how we are defining it. So we're going to start off with really a quick quote here at the beginning. So we must realize that when basic needs have been met, human development is primarily about being more and not having more. And I think that really falls into the great scheme of basic needs and knowing and understanding that there are these support systems that students are needing. So ensuring that equitable access to nutritious food, secure and adequate housing to sleep, study, cook, or shower at, to promote sustained mental and physical well-being, affordable transportation, resources for personal hygiene products, and emergency needs that students might have for themselves or for their dependents. So how are we defining it today? We're going to say is the university defines basic needs as the minimum resources necessary to holistically support all of our students on their daily lives. All right, so we're going to start off today with this session and just kind of really talking again about, our initiatives and strategies implemented on our campuses, including forming strategic partnerships, fundraising, influencing policy, and also conducting research. So today we're going to start off with Hannah first. Hey, Hannah, do you want to unmic?
Hi, Philip. Thanks for having me here today.
Awesome. Well, Hannah, we've had a great opportunity to work over the last couple of years and share our different resources and how we in the U.S. are supporting students in regards to basic needs and securities. But can you describe some of the work and services and programs offered in your space and how you develop those initiatives?
Sure. So the Basic Needs Center at the University of Colorado Boulder is still relatively new in comparison to some of our counterpart schools. We founded the program in 2022, but had been doing the work of food assistance on campus since about 2016, prior to that. And all of that was housed under another department that I oversaw. We were able to start first with mobile pantries and pocket pantries on our campus, building up kind of small food resources around campus where students could access them in academic units or shared spaces like our student unions or medical or health centers. And then obviously COVID happened, and we were trying to figure out, one, we knew food insecurity. I don't know that it skyrocketed for some folks. It definitely became more prevalent for others in ways that they maybe had never anticipated or experienced prior to that. And so we decided to centralize and create our pantry in 2020, and it's called the Buff Pantry. It was a 200 square foot room, one little refrigerator, and we were able to start serving students out of that and a centralized location. We also heavily invested in our mobile pantries then, and we're serving those open to anyone in our community, students, staff, faculty, anyone that lived in our county and kind of surrounding areas. And kind of during that height of shutdown time, we were running mobile pantries for around 500 people a week for several months. So we're distributing 25,000 pounds of food in like a 2-hour time frame. So all of those resources came from initially some support from our university, through donor funds, and then a really significant partnership, which I think I'll talk about a little bit more, but with our community food bank called Community Food Share, that serves our Boulder and Broomfield County areas here. Once we were able to create that, we were really thinking about creating this larger hub of resources. So, we're serving 12 to 1,500 students kind of a semester with food out of a small food pantry. Around 500 square feet is kind of what we still have right now, but we do have opportunities for fresh produce and refrigerated and frozen foods, as well as shelf stable foods and things that students would want to eat kind of grab and go style. But we knew that housing was a really big issue. We were hearing such a significant portion of our students stating that they couldn't afford the rent that they had. There wasn't really any emergency, like any way to really address emergency if they came up in their lives. And, in the US, lots of campuses had COVID money, and they were giving COVID money out to address emergencies and kind of significant costs for folks that they had incurred. And we wanted to figure out how to create that and keep it moving forward. So ultimately, we created a proposal for the Basic Needs Center, launched that in 2022 that really focused on preventative measures of intentional outreach for our campus. So we spend a good portion of our time trying to just let people know that these services exist, working to destigmatize students even asking for help. And we really centered the creation of this pantry, or not just the pantry, but of the Basic Needs Center, around the idea that we didn't want to put the burden of asking for help always on students, that campuses and universities needed to have the resources available and let students know proactively versus making it so that they're always the ones doing self-advocacy. That burden is high. It comes at a burnout cost for over and over, and specifically for folks that have already historically marginalized identities. That cost is high, and we wanted to make sure that we were there to support them. So we created financial literacy programs, how to help students budget on, tight dollars, educational programs like cooking classes, how to cook the things that we were giving in the pantry, and additional, education programs on how to teach our staff and faculty how to recognize, identify, and refer students who they see having basic needs insecurities from food and housing. We also launched our emergency housing initiatives in 2020 in a partnership with our campus, University Housing and Residence Life, and we're able to do same-day placements for students that were experiencing high levels of housing insecurity. So whether that was they were safety concerns, they were being displaced because of roommate or intimate partner violence, or uninhabitable living conditions. So they had a flood in their house, a fire, true natural disaster, kind of things like that. And since we opened, we've been able to distribute over 1.1 million pounds of food from our pantries and mobile pantries. We have distributed $360,000 and counting in emergency assistance for housing to help keep students in their housing. So that's another piece that we offered, was emergency funding. And we've supported 118 students to access emergency housing since we launched those in our time. We also have a meal swipe program where students donate excess meal swipes, and then we redistribute those to students that need extra food on our campus. So we're trying some other strategies to not just have the food pantry be the only and main source of our support, but I'd love to hear what other campuses are doing and how to build it. We do have a more centralized resource kind of offering, so I will say there's others that are doing it way better than we are currently. I think we have some great offerings, and to know that we scaled up pretty quickly and that it can happen if you don't have those on your campus. We are funded by donors currently, and so we're still trying to identify and diversify our funding resources so that we can long-term sustain this. And I'd love to hear from you all what other resources or ways that you're going about this work, but that's what we've got so far.
Yeah, and that's really great. And again, you're talking really about that holistic, care for the student, right? You talked about housing, you talked about food, different assistance programs that kind of go along with it. Can you kind of share a little bit about how were partnerships with community organizations such as food banks and how those were formed?
Yeah, those partnerships are critical. So initially we had reached out when we started Pocket Pantries with our food bank to see how we could get some food that we could put out on those shelves, right? What are the shelf stable things that we can throw in there? It was really the food bank that helped us realize that we could grow this and scale it in a way that could support a larger population. The area of the city that we live in, that the university is housed in, doesn't have a grocery store for the majority of the population that off-campus housing students live in. Within 2 miles of it. And so it's difficult to find food. And if you don't have a car or transportation, we do have good public transportation infrastructure in our city, but not everyone knows how to navigate it or is willing to navigate that to get groceries and things. And so the community food bank, community food share was able to really help us figure out how we could get a significant portion of food. So we get deliveries from them twice a week delivered to our campus by their truck as they're on their way to do grocery pickups from stores. And we get around 4,000 pounds of food each delivery. And so we're going through a significant amount of food, but they have been, when I say I've never had such a good partnership in the 17 years that I've worked in higher ed than we have with our food bank, it's a testament to how far out of the way they will go to help make their partner agencies be successful. And so I feel very privileged and spoiled, honestly, by the fact that they deliver us food. We don't have to go pick that up every single week, multiple times, but they're from the top of their organization, their CEO, all the way to folks who support the deliveries by driving trucks and delivering that food. Every single one of them knows about our office and our pantry. They're excited. They help us source and get more food, and we get 99% of our food for our pantry and our mobile pantries from them at zero cost. So it also saves us hundreds of thousands of dollars a year by going.
And you're able to put that towards other programs that you have. That's awesome. And again, those community food bank folks, they're definitely lifesavers in regards to being able to support, you know, our students on campus. So thanks, Hannah, for that.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yemi. So again, this is new. We've had these conversations in regards to, like, what's happening in the UK, what's happening overseas in regards to being able to support students and basic needs. And basic needs is a little bit of a newness aspect in the terms. And that's why we wanted to make sure that because we do have folks from all over the world on this call, we wanted to make sure that we identified and defined what basic needs was. So could you share your insights on the newness of basic needs work in the UK? And then what research have you conducted and what creative community supports and services have you implemented on your campus?
Yeah, absolutely. And so student basic needs as a concept in the UK is relatively new, but on reflection and having the conversations with colleagues in the States and other places, realizing that the work around supporting students' well-being has always been consistent for as long as student unions have been around in the UK. What has seen us kind of drive and really pay attention to student basic needs and really connect with institutions and people like Phil in other countries is the COVID pandemic in 2020 really made us start to look at students' physiological needs. So we have always, if you look at Maslow's kind of hierarchy of needs, student unions have always tried to be places that looked after student love and belonging, have always tried to be places that looked after safety, whether it's protection from harm or all of those things, but never really strayed into the areas of physiological need. So that's shelter, housing, food, that's sleep, that's clothing. We've never really strayed into that. 2020 and the resulting pandemic and economic crisis and what we called the cost of living crisis here was something where we were really starting to see not just those students from marginalized populations who were struggling, but students across the generality of our institutions struggling. And so that's when we as an institution and we as a students' union said we need to start to do something. And I would be remiss if I said that it was the Students' Union who initially picked it up. It was actually our student government and our elected student leaders who were asking the question, we should be doing something. And so what was the first piece of work that happened about how we really started to pay attention to student basic needs was around food. And food poverty. And so one of our student officers, Kim, was like, do we have any surplus money? Could we just buy some food and give it out for students? And I think that for me, when we started to think about those of us who don't have basic needs centers, those of us who are really trying to get some strategy in the work, is starting from somewhere. And so she took some we found some funding. We took some funding and we took over a classroom. And we advertised to those students who were on scholarship and said, please come down, like we've got some food available, you're on scholarship, come and help yourselves. And we were able to, people were able to pick up a bag of food, very similar to what Hannah was saying, like there were recipes in the bags as well to prevent food waste and really kind of give people more skills. But that was a really good example. And if you can see on my slide down at the bottom, that is Zainab, who is one of our student officers this year, who has kind of carried that on and carried that work on kind of 3 or 4 years later. We have a challenge at Arts. It's the University of the Arts London, which is great. But the map that you see in the center in the bottom indicates where our campus is. So that map is about 15 miles by 8 miles wide. And if you were to look at the red pinpoints, those are our campuses, and our blue pinpoints are our halls of residence. The kind of the red pinpoint, which is at the top right, if you were to travel from that campus all the way down to the campus which is in the bottom left down at Wimbledon, would take you about an hour and a half, and that's just those two things in a straight line. So one of the things that we have had to think about is in terms of what does it mean when we have a disparate student population, a real commuter student population. And so for us, in terms of how we have moved forward and how we have strategized, is the importance of research and talking to our students and getting a real sense and understanding about the challenges that they are facing. And I think all of us know some students, or all of us have kind of pockets of students that we are talking to, but do we know enough about holistically, if you've got a finite amount of resources, we do, like, where is it best going to be served? Where do we need to be? What do we need to be talking about? And so two things that we have done over the course of the last couple of years is we've done two major pieces of research with students. One was looking at their cost of living. So what does it look like? What does it feel like to be a student? If you take away kind of the academic context, what does their cost of living look like? And that's giving us a real indication. And then we started looking into the private rented sector in London. 83% of our students do not live in a halls of residence. They live in some other type of property. And so what does that look like? And for us, what we started to uncover is, and it gave us a real sense of what we needed to be looking at. So our research found that 48% of our students who responded to the survey had cut back on food in order to make ends meet. So we knew that strategically looking at how we are looking at food poverty was an important thing. Similarly with housing, we now know kind of the percentage of the number of students who live in off-campus accommodation, but also knowing that 42% of them who are living in that type of accommodation have also cut back on heating, and in a way to look after their cost of living. And so us looking at making sure our students are safe and secure. And then lastly, I think for us, and why research has been important, is it's not just about generalized cost of living for art students, but also the cost of education. So our art students, fashion students, sculpture students, they are seeing as part of their basic needs that they cannot afford their cost of study. And so that's work that we have been doing. We've seen some real great success in that. So this video that I'm playing now, in typical arts kind of line, the research report that we did around the private rented sector, we then invited artists on campus to come and host an exhibition in an abandoned, disused house, which also serves as a gallery, to really give credence to students and really kind of ram home the experiences that they are having living in off-campus accommodation while studying, and looked at things like heating, looked at things like food poverty and those types of challenges that students are facing. What that's meant for us strategically about how we're going to move forward is now that we know kind of what the scale of the challenge is, now that we know that there's work to be done, we as a union are able to invest £100,000 over the next 2 years, is about $130,000 to really get a true sense as to kind of strategically where are we going with student basic needs for arts in the next kind of 4 to 5 years. I'm really pleased that Margarita, who is in their second day in the job, is on the call and has found this community. So we're so excited about that, and my colleague Martin as well, of Bill, who you know. And so what I would kind of leave with is saying that firstly, it's really important to do that research and get a sense of what the students on your campus are needing and wanting. It's also important just to start somewhere. We're so used to like trying to be perfect or having this thing that served everyone. And sometimes you just have to start somewhere and let things grow organically from there. But then also kind of using the skills of your students to publicize and showcase the work that you're doing has been crucial. And that exhibition that we had, we were able to invoke kind of local councillors, local members of government, and start to open a conversation with students about citizenship, working with the members of parliament and using their experiences to kind of talk to their communities about their experiences of being students.
No, that's great. I mean, I think what you talked about as far as the research and things like that, it's really telling that story, right? How are you getting out in front and say, based off of this, we have, 40% of our students are having this issue, right? And that research that goes along with it is that proof that you need to be able to go to your administration, to be able to go to your city and state and representatives and say, this is a problem on our campus, and how are we going to go about really trying to find programs and initiatives that are going to really be able to connect our students with. And I love what you said there about you don't have to be perfect. It just start with something, right? And that's even if it's new, look at what your colleagues are doing across the world, really, and seeing what you can do at your campus, and then build off of that along with the storytelling. So that's really great. Thank you for sharing that, Yemi. So Alan, last but not least, we've probably talked the most. I know you do a podcast in general in regards to, basic needs, again, in the UK and Wales and things like that. So can you talk a little bit about, Alan, about how you've integrated various areas to address basic needs work?
Yeah, I think it's probably worth starting, because I'm down here as a trustee of Aberystwyth SU. And so I wanted to talk about Aberystwyth just for a minute, purely because I suppose I love Aber, and I've got colleagues on the call who've been there as well. It's at one of the least developed ends in terms of basic needs work. Obviously, the Welsh government's very, very generous, and through lockdown, as Yemi was talking before, different grants have been available, and Hannah was mentioning grants as well. Welsh government were really generous with Welsh unions, and the team were doing door-to-door food drops and special packages and stuff like that. And also, does it have to always be basic needs? Can it be a chocolate bar as well? Yes, it can. And so that little sort of the simple things in life that are pleasures. But Aber, like a lot of unions in the UK, it's at the stage of doing clothes swaps and basic food pantry work. And Aberystwyth, I suppose, is a town of 10,000 people on the coast of Wales, mid Wales, with 10,000 students lumped on top of it as well. So there's a real town and gown sort of thing. But obviously, one of the social problems that has there as one of the basic needs is the quality of housing. There's an supply of housing. There's nowhere else for people to go. It's quite isolated as a place. Rents go up, quality goes down. There we go. Capitalism waves its hand. And so I just wanted to sort of do that shout for Aber before I spoke about other unions first, really. As Yemi said, we're at the kind of basic level of basic needs in the UK, where the terminology itself is what we're trying to bring, with some real outliers like Arts SU, like Leeds, Manchester, Hallam. I'm going to miss someone out for trying to list the ones that are really going for it. I think everyone's trying in their own way, but it's worth looking at the structure of a UK students' union in order to answer your question. Our unions have evolved from three separate bits: student advocacy, student development and entertainment, and I suppose student government. Those things plug together, and each of those strands typically work in their own bubbles. And one of the challenges of working, and one of the joys of working with unions in the UK, has been to try and support unions to have that confidence to talk across themselves. And sometimes it's about subtle changes in emphasis. It's about, once again, we're talking back to lockdown. One of the phenomenal things about lockdown was when you realize that sports clubs were about well-being, like that. And that's the kind of cross-talk in the UK. We're probably about 4 years behind the US where they're at, but it's those kind of things that I find working with unions about, I don't know, let's see, well-being being a driver for academic performance as opposed to just something that can go wrong is another way of looking at it. So trying to get our unions are great places to work, but they've all evolved with their own traditions in them, and trying to get them to work across is something that is a labor of love, I think, and that's how we will solve it in the UK in terms of linking across our areas, and also resource-wise, we can't always create a new bit of the union, so these things have to talk across. Policy-wise, I think, you might know the UK, our unions are naturally more oriented towards advocacy and less so towards services, to be honest. I know I used to be an advisor, so I say that in spite of my own background, but they are more oriented towards like collective advocacy, that kind of political representation. And Yemi's mentioned hidden costs and over in the UK, I suppose our political representative body is NUS UK. Our individual approach is probably similar to what we've got the Citizens Advice Bureau, where we're more likely to organise around singular symptoms. But in this topic of basic needs, there are so many symptoms. There are so many keen things like housing prices, cost of living in general, social isolation becomes a part of all this. So I think the UK union sort of approach is working backwards from the student lived experience, like through the research Yemi mentioned, and trying to work out through each barrier that the students encounter and developing a theory of change at that stage. Is the problem local, such as course costs? Is it citywide, like accommodation quality? Is it regional? So we could be talking about transport. And which aspects of these are sort of with the state? Are they national with the government? For example, like we've got to think about our threshold for maximum financial aid in England hasn't really moved realistically over 10, 15 years. And if you looked at inflation, it's currently about £25,000 in order to be eligible for full support. But if it had moved with just inflation, it would be about £41,000. And so what that means is we're seeing fewer and fewer students entitled to full financial support, driven into full-time jobs and more. Full-time jobs is probably the minimum that these students have got to do. A long-time full-time study, which obviously has significant side effects for everyone, not least student parents, mature students, people with more complex lives. And so I think the aspect there is the advocacy work is more government-facing in that space. And in terms of partnerships, we tend to do it on a union-to-union level, either organically, just because we're friends and we know each other. Regional organising, so the London region is a good example of that, where it talks to each other. Very, very unique project. The Welsh unions talk to each other. Very unique sort of situations about where they are. Our memberships of the likes of the National Union of Students UK, NUS UK, the NUS Charity, which is more about our infrastructure, or organisations like Wonky, which focuses more on policy in the UK, and through events and communities of practice, such as, over our side of the Atlantic, the Membership Services Conference, but over your side of the Atlantic, ACUI Conference, those kind of like networks about where people come together to try and just like solve these problems and get on board. I think when you get into suppliers, we have a different problem in the UK, I think, in that we could probably capital fundraise to build I've seen Rutgers, it's excellent, Phil, Rutgers Centre. We could capital fundraise to build a basic needs centre. But we don't have that philanthropic infrastructure to be able to keep it running. So for us, it's probably more, and also, I've spoken to colleagues over in the States. It's equally the same. I get that, but it's going to be much more reliant on corporate partnerships, on digging in locally with local charities and suppliers and stuff like that, and finding organizations with similar missions. Travel affects everyone. So if you want to get the cost of transport down, then you're affecting both ends of the spectrum. So students are trying to study, staff are trying to get to work. Like those kind of things. Food affects everyone. We have situations, and I'm sure it's true in the States as well, where the number of students living in a city has a distortive effect on rent prices and rent levels and housing.
Sure. Correct.
So
and you saw that on that initial slide there. It talks a little bit about all those prices and how they've raised up. So here in New Brunswick, $2,000 for 700 square foot apartment. So again, we're seeing those effects worldwide in that regards. So
yeah.
Alan, I'm just going to say that is great, because I think your ability to really work with the unions in that regards, and also looking at the policies and things that are out there and how you're able to influence those different policies are great. So I'm just going to open it up for the rest of the panel here, and then we're also going to get some questions that kind of come into the chat as well. But I think we have seen where we are across the country or across the world in regards to how we are at this level or that level, and if it's new, and how we're just really trying to break into being able to support our basic needs for our students. So I think the biggest piece and how I think why a lot of folks, and I think we have like 50 so folks on this call, how can we build those strategies? What does that partnerships look like, and how, if somebody is looking to try to do that, or somebody from community and they wanted to come to a campus, how does that partnership look like? How does that start? If anybody wants to kind of jump in on that, and this is for everyone to be able to answer.
I think from my perspective, I think it's around in order to build that partnership, you have to proactively go out and look for partners. I know that the work that we are doing, the work that we try to do has come from us saying, like, we don't know what we don't know. So we need to go out and actively try and find those people who are doing work. It's how I met Phil, and how then I met Phil, and then a colleague of mine on the call, Martin. I was like, Martin, you need to have a conversation with Phil. They come back within an hour, and Martin's like, I've got all of these ideas. Like, you have to be willing to put yourself out there to talk to institutions that you wouldn't typically talk to. Like, we all have our circles, we all have those colleagues at other institutions who we kind of talk to about things, and that's great. But you also have to be willing to, like, just randomly email someone and say, hi, I saw you're doing something that we're not doing, and I know you don't know me, but would you fancy just having a Teams call or a Zoom call for 15 minutes and point me in the right direction, or give me some information, and doing that by trial and error. But those partnerships are not going to fall in your lap. They're not just going to kind of turn up on our campus. We have to actively go out and seek them, and really build it a piece at a time.
Yeah, Hannah, I think that's kind of how our relationship started, came from, hey, I don't know what I don't know, and I'm new to this world itself. What are you doing? So again, how do you think our partnerships, or even other partnerships on college campus, at least in the US focus of things, have really can gain traction if you're looking to try to do this?
Yeah, I mean, Yemi is correct. I think you have to put yourself out there and be willing to just say, I don't know all of this. And why would we? I mean, it's not like many of us went to school to be social workers. I mean, some of us did, right? It wasn't me. I did political science. Here's what I'm doing with my degrees. But I think, for us, it started, I want to go back to the way that all of this work started on our campus. Was we got a group of staff together that had heard a couple of student stories over our time, and said, the reason it pushed me into this work is I had a student who I worked with on a regular basis, almost daily, told me she had only eaten a banana in 2 days because that's what she had. And I was like, oh, that's not going to work for us anymore. So we got a group of staff and students together to form a committee, kind of a coalition or a collective, and say, what do we do about this? And we started power mapping our way through our community, and finding and identifying what are all the resources out there, just so that we can, one, start referring students to resources that already exist. And then, to Yemi's point, we just started outreaching to all of those folks and said, can we learn what you do so we can know how to send students to you? And then realizing, like, well, that's not going to be super accessible for all of our folks on this campus. And our students come from lots of communities. To both of their, to Yemi and Alan's experience, like, you're serving people from all over a large city or across countries. And so to know what those resources and opportunities are for students to access services, we have to become experts at knowing our communities, knowing what's there, knowing what and what isn't, right? So we created a lot of this because there's a gap. I said earlier, there's no grocery stores. So we had to create an opportunity. And part of the reason our partnership with our food bank works so well is because they know there's not a pantry close to us on this part of the city. So how we figure out how to do that. And then I just started calling all of you across the country, or some of you called me, and I learned as much from you as I hopefully shared with you. But I picked a few schools to benchmark against, and I just went in and just tried to learn as much as we could. And then You know, the best part of it has been getting students involved in doing some of that partnership management, and that's a skill set that they can learn, right?
Yeah, we actually just got a question in from Emily Payne. She asked that exact same question of, do each of you have an aspirational institution that you model your programs on? So, is there some folks out here that, want to maybe throw out a couple schools that if they're looking at trying to do this work that are, doing it well and, have some good best practices in that regards?
I would say yes and no. So,
Okay.
Phil's going to blush, but I look at, like, if you have not seen the information on Rutgers new Basic Needs Center, absolutely, it looks like a grocery store. It's absolutely incredible. And there are a number of others in kind of New England, but as I have been on tours of other institutions, it's less around having an aspirational institution and more around aspirational people. And that's because those are the people who have the energy and the drive to do the same thing that you're doing. I have to recognize that, like, square footage in London is incredibly expensive. I'm not going to be able to build a basic needs center unless we have, like, a mega wealthy donor, right? But what I can do is say, what is the energy that Phil is driving towards, and how do I harness that for the students on my campus? And so I think the networks, yes, looking at those institutions is important, but also finding those people who are going to help feel you to drive forward, for me, is a way of curbing the jealousy. When I see someone else being able to, like, do a ribbon opening, I'm like, okay, I can't do that, but if I can show up every day trying to do my best, then I'm okay.
Yeah. What about you, Alan? Yeah.
Well, I was going to say Rutgers as well, Phil, because I've seen it. But I will say, Portland Community College. I saw a presentation by them, and I've spoken
They do a
to
really good
the
job.
team.
Yeah.
Really good on. I mean, it's all aspects of the program, isn't it? But really good on the stats side of things, like what they know about use. Anyone can learn from, basically, I think. And I've modeled my thinking in a policy space, I'm ahead on Portland Community College. And the other one, which is a bit left field of this entire conversation because they're not here, is I have faith in students in terms of creativity and how that can come out. And we do, like, Euro tours over our side of the Atlantic. And I went to Malmö University, which is in Sweden. And it's a kind of like a technical university, I suppose. I can't do the American language to describe what it is. Yemi, it's a Met. There you go, it's a Met. And their students identified that the most precarious point in the student's time in their university was the week before the loan payment was due. Their students are at their poorest and most at risk in that week. And so that week they give out free breakfast every day. That was their simple idea. They didn't overcook it, literally didn't overcook it, but they didn't overthink about trying to set up a whole sustainable solution about, say, a basic needs center, which individuals like us should be thinking about in that way. They went, we will do a free breakfast for everyone in that week. And that is creative thinking, and that really got at the heart. And so I look for inspiration in fun, kind of off the pitch ideas that students have a lot of the time as well. And that energy is also true with staff, as Yemi points out.
Yeah. A lot of times I could beat the drum, staff members, we could beat the drum. We need this, we need this. But until the students come out and say, we need this, it may not even happen on your campus. So I think that support of the students and getting their buy-in is truly truly something that has to happen in order for this to really work, right? We as staff can't do it all ourselves. And again, it's not us as an institution that can do it all ourselves. It has to be community, it has to be alumni, it has to be your federal, state governments, things like that, that have to be a part of that pushing the needle forward. What about you, Hannah? I see you're muted.
Yeah, so I benchmarked a lot of mine against California schools from an aspirational place. They're doing this across their policy space, across their governance structures as well within the UC, CSU, and community college systems. So I benchmarked against UC Berkeley in a significant way. And Yeah, it was aspirational, but it was more about the content of the formation of their center from a justice-based lens of really ensuring that those root causes, systemic oppression, things like that are getting addressed in this work. So basic needs work is justice-based DEI work at its core, at its foundation. And that was really important to me to be able to move through. And I know us in the US we're cautious to say things like that right now, because it does mean there could be repercussions for that. But that is critical. And then community colleges in our state, because let's be honest, community colleges have been doing this work way longer than big four-year institutions, because they've seen the populations of folks who have higher needs come through first. And so I want to give them all that credit as well. They're, they
Yeah.
don't
A
always
lot
get
of times,
resources, but
yeah,
that's
a lot of times they're doing more with less.
way
you know,
more.
and
Yeah,
way more
absolutely.
with less. And again, our community colleges are the backyards, the forefront for a lot of our students that then funnel them into our four-year institutions.
Correct.
So
So yeah.
that it's huge. And I think we've seen the shifts and things like that in regards to work and what we are trying to do on our individual campuses. I guess is there any future goal or project that you have in mind that that you would um, like to implement to further support student basic needs work on your campus?
I'll go. So I think in the UK it's about getting that community of practice together. But I really like some of the regionalised sort of organising that's happening in the UK at the moment. The Greater Manchester Student Partnership's a good example of this. And I think through those kind of regional partnerships between students' unions, they'll be able to harness better links with locality around suppliers, around how you support basic needs on a more kind of in a location-based kind of situation as opposed to just an institution-based one. So that's probably where I'm distracted towards looking at that as a solution at the moment.
Having just done my Clifton Strengths for the first time, I could come up with lots of ideas. For me, you're right, Alan. I think seeing some of that like regional partnership, seeing in London a regional partnership around kind of housing and transport is started to come together. And UAL Arts is 50% international, 53% international students. And so they are seeing their housing for the first time when they've just stepped off a plane, sometimes for 12 hours. And so how we'd be able to really help in that space for safe and secure living is important to us. I think also food poverty for me, and I have a great aim, and my colleagues are on the call, so they're going to be like, we're going to hold you to this. Having a food pantry on each of our campuses would be the ideal dream, because I don't know how students do their best when they have empty stomachs, and not just having one, but having those food pantries with closest access to where students are is something that I would really love to see and will continue to drive towards. And then last, just adequate resourcing for students who are in hardship. And that's a difficult conversation when you're speaking to the powers that be, the higher ups, the people who hold the purse strings, but just reminding them that like retention and attainment and student success is built on, if you can't eat and sleep and get to college, get to your campus, you can't succeed. And so being able to have programs that focus on that, but connecting it back to the university's mission is something I'd like to see.
Hannah, did you want to join in?
Yeah, I too, Yemi, I too have ideation in my top, it's my top strength actually too. So yes, I have a million ideas, and I need, one is I'm working on some regional stuff in Colorado. So we've formed our Colorado Higher Education Basic Needs Coalition, getting all of our community colleges and campuses, four-year colleges across the state to join. One, to do this type of development across our state so that then we can work to find and identify our policy advocacy lanes that we would like to push through our state legislatures to figure out what way do we want our Department of Higher Ed and our state legislators to help support this work across. I know I could do this on the CU Boulder campus and keep pushing and pushing. I am more interested in our collective movement of this across our state, so that it is equitable for all of our institutions, so that it doesn't matter what institution a student goes into in Colorado, but they have access to those resources, regardless if it's, a 4-year, a 2-year, private, public institution. We know that students are going to need that across the board. So that's kind of the big idea I'm working on, and I'm working to get all of our institutions aligned and utilize the same survey to collect data. So Cooper had asked a question, I'm typing that answer in the chat, but we actually benchmarked this from Rutgers. This is the thing I took from Philip, was a survey, and we are trying to launch that across our state at all of our institutions. But we did that for our campus last year, and we'll run that again next year. So data is the driver of dollars and of decisions at our institutions right now. And so we need to be the most data informed as we possibly can and demonstrate that we can utilize that data to make innovative and practical decisions in tough times, as I think a lot of us are going to experience with financial cuts and stuff. So that's it.
Yeah. Thank you for that. We have one last question, and I think we're going to have to be able to hand it back over to our guests here. But there was a question in the chat for, is the UK experiencing similar post-secondary funding cutbacks like they are in Canada? And how is that affecting food security efforts?
So I would say yes. So for those of you who are US based, students enter a higher education at 18, very similar. But the last 2 years of your high school it's slightly different here than it is with you guys. For me, what we're seeing is, because the national government is putting more money into kind of early years education, which they should be, as a parent of 2 early years children, they should be. But what they're doing is, rather than finding that money from somewhere else, they're cutting one area. So it's all within the education budget. They're just pushing it further forward. The problems with that, though, is students are struggling, universities are struggling. So the income that they're getting from fees, because the fees for tuition fees for students in the UK is set by the government, institutions can't set their own, means there's less money in real terms. And one of the challenges that we often see is the presumption that because they are university students, they have and they've come through the education system, that they have a family who is backing them. Or they have a family who, they may well have parents who love them and support them and want to do the best for them. That doesn't mean that they have the spare capital in order to support them at their time at higher education. And so I think there is really a need for kind of national and federal governments to really look at what we call the student journey, which is, how do all of those things bump up against each other? Because a university student was once a secondary student, was once an elementary school student, and they're just not joining up. What that means for what a student who is 5 now, what that looks like in 15 years' time.
Alan, anything else? Or
I would say it's equally true everywhere that also there's a great proportion of mature students in the UK, and whether it's a post-pandemic thing, those things all have knock-on effects. And it's a fair question to ask. Universities are meant to be about the top end of Maslow's hierarchy of need. Universities are meant to be about self-actualizing, and as we work and put efforts into intervening on basic needs, I think that the question here talks about, how do you share the money out, as Yemi was just explaining then. And really, I suppose I say this from like a UK advocacy, pointing fingers at university sort of angle. It's not always the university's fault, and I think in fact, it often isn't. But that we have a real job with how we do the spending envelope in the UK about the funding of our higher education system. Otherwise, we're just, what do you call it, robbing from Peter to pay Paul, constantly, constantly just like moving the deck chairs around on an increasingly small and sinking ship. There you go. There's a nice ending to that.
No, I think that's great. Thanks, Alan. And I think for us, again, it's going to be a ever changing opportunity for us to learn from each other, to be able to gain information, see what we're doing, ask questions, things like that. And these spaces like what we're currently having allows for that to really flourish. And again, I thank ITGA for um, allowing us to be able to have this conversation, to be able to share what we are doing on our different campuses. We would love to connect with your different campuses even more. We have placed in the chat each one of our LinkedIns. If you would like to connect with us through LinkedIn, a lot of times we can jump on a Zoom to be able to have those unique conversations. So again, thank you to the panelists for being here, and audience again, just for being here, listening, and again, wanting to do the work in your communities, on your campuses as well. So I'm going to hand it back over to Melissa.
Yeah, thanks, Phil. I'll take it. And thank you to our panelists. That was terrific. I think we could have gone on easily for another hour. I always feel like we just scratched the surface when we have these webinars, but tremendous food for thought. And we will also send you contact informations for all the presenters in the recording. And Phil will send those slides as well if you provide them with us. 3 reminders of upcoming other programs from ITGA that you may be interested in. Our ITGA annual conference will be taking place June 4th to 6th in Kent, Ohio. More information can be found at itga.org. If you like this conversation, come and join us in Ohio and hear more of these kinds of sessions. Also on April 25th, there is a town hall for ITGA members, staying true to our mission and values in uncertain times, a timely conversation that we all felt was important to have. So please feel free to join us for that one. And finally, our next Collaborative Communities webinar will take place on June 18th on the topic of economic development in college towns. And we'll be sure to let you know when that one is available as well. Registration isn't quite open for that, but this Collaborative Communities Conversation series of free webinars are open to anyone. So if you feel free to share them widely. There's a lot of room here in our ITGA tent. We thank you for being here today. We'll be in touch soon, and I hope you all have a great day. Thank you.